this OpenSIPS summit a month and a half ago. To decide what to show you today here. And instead of showing something very, very sophisticated, I have chosen to show you something that it's a little bit basic, but everybody has some questions about this. How do I run how do I use OpenSIPS as a PBX? How do I implement services such as call transfer, call pickup, voicemail and everything? And this is something that I thought was interesting. And I know that in an audience we have people that are very advanced, and there are people also that they are in the beginning of their OpenSIPS implementation. So I tried, let me show, I brought this as a case study. So this is to show you what has happened in the last years when we try it, and in some cases with success, to use OpenSIPS as a PBX. My company is called SIPPulse. It's located in Brazil. This is a picture of the office. It's funny, this picture is actually a rare picture. We have snow on the mountains here on the top. This is something that didn't happen in Brazil in the last 40 years. Alright, so it was funny to arrive in the morning and say, hey, there's snow on the mountains. It never happened. It never happened in my life. It started in 2007. It's focused on the ISP and ITSP market. We have more than 200 customers for wholesale, residential, PBX and hosted PBX, LMP redirect servers, and anti-fraud services. The first question is OpenSIPS suitable as a PBX? The question is why we should choose OpenSIPS as a PBX platform. It has no media capabilities, no built-in PBX features. There's no transfer on the system. There's no call pickup on the system. There's no PBX features. It's a tremendous effort to implement even simple features. Right, so it's much harder to implement the PBX using OpenSIPS than with any other tool that you can find. Right? So why to choose? That's the first question. Huh?
You're a masochist.
Why to use OpenSIPS? Well, let's try to answer this question. The first thing is the SIP compliance. SIP phones and gateways expect to have a proxy in the middle. Actually, when you go to a manual of a Yelling phone or a Polycom phone or any phone, they expect to have a proxy in the middle. They expect to use methods such as subscribe, notify, publish, lots of SIP methods that usually don't traverse a normal PBX, a normal IP-PBX. If you see Asterisk and FreeSwitch, they are back-to-back user agents, right? So if you send a subscribe, this subscribe will not be relayed to the other phone. So you need to do a lot of magic on Asterisk or FreeSwitch to support the phone features. So you have to do a lot of magic on the PBX to support this. And OpenSIPS, you can implement the service exactly as it was designed in the SIP standard. You have support for presence and instant message using simple, something that you don't have on a normal PBX. It's easier to implement advanced features, like you can implement some interesting things on the phone, like paging, TLS, SRTP, easy to implement. They have built-in security, TLS security. This is, right now, both Asterisk and FreeSwitch support TLS, but a few years ago, when we decided to use OpenSIPS as the PBX platform, they didn't have the support. It's codec agnostic. I can use any codec. If Opus is available today, we could use Opus for our PBX right now. I don't need support for the codec on the PBXs. No audio interference, no extra latency, and no jitter, because we don't deal with audio most of the time. That's something nice too, because customers can say, I had a problem with voice quality. It's not my problem. It's something on your gateway or on your phone, because Yellow is not even traversing my system. Right? Scalability, 50,000 or more users per server. So you can run an entire company, an entire university. You can run almost a city, a small city with a platform. Multi-domain, you can set multi-domains. For hosted PBX, it's really important. You set each customer with a different domain, usually. So each customer can have its own domain, its own administrative domain. Is easily scaled to thousands of calls per second. So you can easily scale the system to easy or not so easy. So it's an excellent platform for centralized hosted PBX. Right? But there's an effort. It's not easy to. There are many things that are not easy. I will bring this case study, CNA. CNA is an internet provider for the financial sector. They have units in São Paulo, Miami, Argentina, Europe, United States, many. In the phase one, we deployed internally, and now they are deploying to customers in different domains. They work in a financial area, so recording was important in this case. So to do recording on OpenSIPs, something that you only have silent, it's funny, but we have implemented recording with the help of RTP Proxy. Choice criteria, possibility to provide PBX services to clients. Sorry, and possibility to provide recording and secure communications. We wanted SRTP and TLS. And actually, we can decode the SRTP on the provider if we save the keys. Right? The decoder for RTP proxy is able to do it in some cases if we need. Multi-domain, one per client. Each client has its own domain. Embedded billing, we have a billing of sale and cost of the calls. Scalability, fault tolerance, and security. That's why we have chosen SIPPulse and Authorizations. Architecture. The architecture is very simple. We have a MySQL cluster, most important part of the system. If you don't have a cluster database, at least master and slave, you won't be able to create a system. A SIP proxy cluster, and the media server. The phones and the units, we have the phones from Yellow. We have standardized on a single phone. And audio codes came first. Right? So everything is standardized. For hosted PBX, the first decision you have to do is you have to standardize because you really depend on the gateway and you really depend on the phone. Right? It's very hard to do something like, okay, half of the phones are yelling, another half of the phones are polygons, and I have some other, who knows what, phones. It's kind of impossible to implement some of the features. So one of the first things you need to do when building a PBX on SIP is to standardize the endpoints and the gateways because you're going to depend on them. Right? Documentation. This is the challenge number one. Number one thing when you're using OpenSIPs as a PBX is how do I transfer? Okay, I don't know. What's the code to transfer on OpenSIPs? Any one of you know? There's no code. Okay, let's go to the manual. Where in the manual is how to transfer a call on using OpenSIPs? It's not on the manual. Because OpenSIP was not supposed to be used as a PBX in the beginning. And actually, the transfer function belongs to the client and not with the server. Right? So the guide is actually this RFC. How to implement SIP services, the RFC 5359. If you want a guide to implement the hosted PBX using OpenSIPs, this is the best document you can have. It explains all the call flows to implement SIP services. Right? So if you're looking for a manual, this is it. Challenge number two, redundancy. So we want to have, it's more or less the same thing. We are using NABTR and SRV. And I would say to you that it works like a charm if your phone supports it well. And Yellow phones, they did a very good job of this. I remember once at the beginning of the project, we had a problem with the IP duplication on the first server. The traffic for some users were sent to the second server, and we discovered 2 days later. No call was lost at this time. we keep both servers up and running. So when something goes wrong, the phone simply sends the call to the other server. The billing is all in the same database, so it doesn't matter if the call is terminated in one server or the other server, the bill is always there. And it's funny what he said. Sometimes the phone answers the second server. Yes, sometimes I go to the second server where I was not supposed to see any call. And sometimes I find some call there. Some failure in the first server could trigger a call to the second server. Even in redundancy. Okay. There are some lessons learned here. The first one is fill all the records. You have to insert this in APTR records. The first case is say, let's do only the SRD records. They're simple. Why this hell NAPTR? I just want to use a UDP. Right? But if you don't fill this NAPTR records, you start to have some issues with post-dial delay. So it tries to find the DNS records and takes some time to place your call. So if you're going to use any DNS server, do it in the right way. Put all the records there. Right? Don't do it just the SRDs. Keep the second server running. Why? Because sometimes the calls, for some reason, goes to the second server, and you don't want to lose this call. So I keep both servers running at the same time. I don't switch from one server to the other. Anyway, I'm in a local network, so I don't have a problem with NAT. No NAT is involved on the system. So I can receive calls from the second server, even with a different socket. If you are a provider and you use NAT traversal, you cannot do this. So this is internal. The external users go through an SBC, so I don't have any problem with NAT traversal on the main machine. Right, so for the structure, everything runs with no NAT involved. When NAT is involved, we use an SBC in front of the system. So they connect it using the outbound proxy, and just at the end works like a charter.
So can you use DNS and do round robin between two servers?
Yes, I think so. It won't be a problem. You can do round robin. I didn't try it. It's an idea, right? If you put the same priority and same weight, it will round robin for you automatically. And as the billing server is in the same database, it won't be a problem. And by the RFC, the 3263, they have to finish the call on the same server, so there's no problem of having part of the transaction in one server and the other. So the whole transaction will be completed on the same server. The challenge number 3 was, first, implement call transfer. There's no PBX if you can transfer a call. Right? So the most important service for a PBX is call transfer. If you can transfer a call, you don't have a PBX, you have a soft switch. This is the call transfer call flow. It's very complicated. This is an attended transfer. So let's suppose the gateway has sent a call to Alice. This is a normal event. Now Alice puts this first call that she received on hold. And the third step, she calls Bob. And the fourth step, she puts Bob on hold. To put a phone on hold is simply a matter of sending a re-invite with a change in the SDP on the session description. So you put both calls on hold. How do I make this work on OpenSIPs? I just have to handle the re-invites. If your system is handling the re-invites, everything works. Now, Alice starts a transfer. She presses the transfer button on the phone. So the transfer on SIP is made by the phone, and the phone needs to have a transfer button. What happens if the phone does not have a transfer button? There's no asterisk 2 to have. It won't work. So a phone that is not capable to transfer will not transfer at all, because it's a function of the phone. So it will send this refer to the gateway. Right? The gateway will set. It will notify Alice, I'm transferring. That's why you see on display transferring your call. And then this gateway will send this invite to Bob with a replace header, replacing this call. the call from Alex. I receive the 200 OK, DACK, and then after this phone will turn off this call. The gateway will notify and finish the call, and the call will be directly from the gateway to. Okay, what I need to do on OpenSIPs in this case? Nothing. But why does it work in my environment? If I don't have to do anything on OpenSIPs to make it work, why does it work in my environment? Actually, the problem is here in the gateway. Your gateway needs to support the refer message, right? And your phones needs to support this replaces. So you need to have a gateway that supports this message. And actually, the little difference between when this thing is working or not is actually the routing table on the gateway. The gateway needs to know how to call on. So usually when we configure the gateway, we just configure the routes ahead. Say, I receive a call from SIP and send this call ahead. But usually your gateway does not know where are your extensions. So you need to inform to the gateway that your extensions will go through your SIP proxy. This is the difference. Actually, to configure a transfer for OpenSIPs is much more a configuration on the gateway than on the OpenSIPs or the phone itself. Because the gateway is actually transferring the call. So you have to do two things. Refer needs to be enabled. In Asterisk, this allow transfer equals yes. In FreeSwitch, I don't remember the parameter. In audio codes, there is another parameter, so that's why you have to standardize what you have as a gateway, right? Because all of them have. The second thing is refer is handled in the same way as invites are handled. So they have an URI, and you have to route this URI correctly. If you can't route this URI, it won't work. So that's why your gateway needs to know where Bob is. If the gateway does not know where Bob is, that's really the clue to make transfers work on OpenSIPs. Once you do this, it will work by design. So where's the transfer button? What's the code for OpenSIPs to transfer? There's no code. It's actually you have to press the transfer button on the phone. So the phone is actually responsible for the transfer. What do you need to support? Refers and the replace header. If your phone does not support replace header, it won't work. If your gateway does not support the replace header, it won't. Right? So you need support from the gateways and the phones. That's why I said choose a good gateway and choose a good phone. Right? And don't mix different brands of phones because the results are unpredictable. Lessons learned. Configure gateways properly for transfer. Return routes and refers are handled in the same way as invites. You need to take care of CDRs and authorizations on the system. There's an unusual situation when someone asks for there's a user that it's not authorized to make an external call. So they call the operator and say, please, make this call and transfer for me. It's very usual. You call the operator makes an international call and transfer to you. When she transfers to you, you have to do a re-invite with the replace header. And it's a new transaction. And if you're not authorized, the transfer will not go through. So you need to use the identity of the referrer instead of the referee. So for this, you have to make some tweaks on the OpenSIP script. And sometimes you say, okay, don't get the ID of the referee, get the ID of the referer to make sure. Go ahead.
Can you go back to the previous screen with the twists? We're working on the messaging. So when you refer to gateway there, are you talking about the PSTN Gateway or the OpenSIPs?
PSTN Gateway.
Okay, all right. I was trying to figure out how the SDP was going to get updated on the OpenSIPs.
Now, look, I'm not seeing the OpenSIPs here,
okay.
Right? Because OpenSIPs, the role of OpenSIPs here is just to route the message. They don't do anything. And
so just pass it back and the reverse port is on the
yeah.
PSTN.
In gateway and send it and inform the gateway where is Bob. Usually Bob is through this proxy. Send back to the proxy, but you need to have a return route, right? It's actually what is wrong in 99% of the problem cases.
I have a question. Maybe it's a misunderstanding on my part, but PSTN Gateway, I thought, connected to
To the SDN?
Yeah,
On
but
one side.
if you have a voice over IP server with voice over IP phones connected to each other, why would it need a gateway in the middle?
Okay, that's a good question. In some cases, I will not have a gateway here. I will have a service provider, let's suppose. I have the Bob, Alice, and a service provider connected to OpenSIPs. And the service provider does not support replaces or refers. What's going to happen? The transfer will not work. You need to put instead of the PSTN gateway, you need to have a gateway, a SIP to SIP gateway, what is in some cases called an SBC.
B2B UA line.
B2B UA. So, if you're connecting to PSTN with a gateway, it's a gateway, but if you're connecting to a VoIP provider to terminate your PSTN calls, you need an SBC. Usually I use FreeSwitch to do this. I put a FreeSwitch just to normalize, to answer this refers and repeats. So if you're going to connect to a VoIP provider that does not support refers and replaces, you will have to insert here an ID to IP gateway, something like that.
Oh, you were
Or
talking about,
either Asterisk or FreeSwitch.
you're talking about what you have on your side, not on the client side.
In the client side, I just have the phone.
That's the one I didn't understand. I thought you had a gateway on each client. That
Yeah.
didn't
No,
make
no,
sense
I
to
have
me.
just the
Yeah, yeah, I understand.
As I said, in the structure, the endpoint, all the endpoints are yelling phones. The Chinese phone there is not very expensive, but it has a very good SIP implementation. Okay, total call transfer solved. Next, copycat and group copycat. Well, the first time I said, we need to support copycat. I said, how am I going to do this? Where's the documentation? No documentation. Again, we went to the RFC, the 5359, to discover what's the flow and how to implement this flow on OpenSIPs. Actually, for OpenSIPs, it's just a matter of routing the requests and replies. The OpenSIPs itself is not responsible for copycat and group copycat, but in some cases, you have to use OpenSIPs to implement things like group copycat. You need some help from OpenSIPs in this case. It's defined on the same RFC, strictly dependent on phone support. Endpoints and gateways need to support replaces. Again, we use a creative way to support non-compliant. Let me show you. This is the standard copy. If you go to the RFC 5359, you're going to see this. What is this? You have the gateway send an invite to Alice. So Alice's phone is ringing, right? Bob is missing here. Okay, but Bob is here and Bob wants to pick up this call. If the phone supports pickup, you're going to press the pickup button on the phone, usually a soft button on the screen, right? You have to configure this button on the phone or a star code in some case, depends on the phone, right? But this needs to be implemented on the phone. It sends a subscribe, it receives a 200 OK, and a notify with the dialog information. To pick up a call, we need the dialog information. Call ID from tagging to tag at least, right? And now, Bob sends an invite replacing Alice on this gate, right? So he uses the call ID from tagging to tag from Alice to send this invite and replace the call on the gateway, right? The gateway sends 200 OK and cancels the call with Alice, and the pickup is done. Right, so this is the way it's implemented on good phones. Oh. In some cases, we have to do a creative way. Another thing, for group copycat, what happens? For group copycat, what you need to do is to create a group and do some parallel forking and send the subscribe to the whole group. Right? It will find the users that are ringing, and then it will pick up on the old. So for group copycat, we need to create a group on OpenSIPs and do a parallel forking to all the users in the group to pick up a call on the group. So there's a difference of directed copycat and group copycat, right? But it's strictly dependent on. But I had a phone that didn't support this thing, didn't have the subscribe, notify. But this phone supported replaces. One of the phones. Not Yelling's work on the best one, but there are phones that we had a requirement for another client that was to use an ATA. We had a requirement for another client that was to use an ATA, an 8-port analog ATA, and we needed to do a copycat. And this analog ATA didn't support the subscribe. So what we did here was a little bit different. The gateway sends an invite to Alice, and Alice sends a 180. In the on-reply out of OpenSIPs, we save the dialog information in memory for group and user. We go there on this local cache and save the information, how I did from tag and to tag from the user. And when Bob dialed the Asterisk 97, I don't generate a CDR, I grab the information about group or direct copycat, insert the replace header, create the header on the system, and send back to the gateway with the replaces. It cancels the other call and completes. Well, this is a little simpler, but you don't need a very sophisticated phone to do it. The first one is much better. If your phone supports, it's much better.
Why won't you use a FreeSwitch or Asterisk network that supports all these features so you don't have to implement?
Because they don't support 50,000 phones.
You don't need to because everything registers to OpenSIPs.
If you are a service provider and you want to, let's go back to the first slide. Okay, why do we choose this thing?
No, I mean for your features, you can use a FreeSwitch or OpenSIPs. You don't need to know the phone.
No, not because if you're using the transfers for, if you're using Asterisk for your transfers, when you have calls between your phones that are not going to the PSTN, you will not be able to transfer. So you cannot do internal transfers because the internal transfers do not traverse Asterisk territory. I can't use it.
Why is that?
Because many of my calls, mainly between phones, do not traverse the Asterisk territory.
Asterisk can still do transfer.
Yeah, it's Asterisk is student transfer, but to use the Asterisk transfer, I have to register the user on Asterisk. I have to do everything. Huh?
So you don't need to be registered to Asterisk. Yeah. Anyway, that's what you talk about.
Okay. But anyway, if you're calling only between phones and you don't have this open of Asterisk, you cannot transfer between phones. If you have 3 phones connected to OpenSIPs, they are not connected to Asterisk in any way. You won't be able to transfer. Right?
If you send the call to Asterisk, you will lose the capacity to high number of calls, or you need to put a lot of Asterisk servers.
Okay.
This is the question.
Let's discuss this later. Again, lessons learned. Configure again gateways properly for transfers and pickups. Return route. Firmware updates. This whole thing didn't work because an old firmware. So if you're going to use a phone, make sure that all phones are on the same firmware, right? Don't lose 2-3 days because of an old firmware. Second, make sure that your users know how to use the phone. We had a lot of problems because users simply don't know how to transfer phone to phone. You're trying the wrong way. And in some cases, there are phones that have very strange instructions. It's something unusual for the user to say, okay, call one user, then put on hold, call the other user, put the other user on hold, and transfer. Press the transfer button. For them, they will never do this because they are not used to this. They will call a user, press the transfer to the other user. They will call a user, then put on hold, call the other user, press the transfer. In some cases, they mess up. Right? Sometimes it's easier to use a FreeSwitch as an SBC to normalize everything before the gateways. In some cases, to configure all the gateways is a pain. So sometimes I prefer to use an SBC in the middle just to listen. Challenge number 5. And then we started with all of this media-related service. IVR, conference, queuing, voicemail, messages and text-to-speech, multi-tenant parking. In this case, we have chosen Asterisk. It was not to implement this on a media server. Why this don't cause me a problem with scalability problem? Because usually these services are, let's say, 1% or 5% of the users actually use this. Right? And queuing in some cases can be very complicated. If you really need something advanced with queuing, this is not the right solution. Right? And we have chosen Asterisk because of the voicemail internationalization, and we are using queuing metrics for some queues and some customers. Right? That's why we use this. Lessons learned. One of the things that I love is the TTS. We are not creating any outages anymore. We are using TTS for everything. With Google TTS, it works very nicely. IVR calls, flows and combinations are usually a nightmare. The call comes from the gateway, goes to the IVR, and the IVR is sent back to the system. Who is authorized? Who is the user? You have to pass the call ID through the IVR. It's usually a pain. And this is combined with call forwarding and plus several other things, it can become a mess. The best thing we did here was to handle IVR as a client. So we actually registered the IVR as a client, and some call to the IVR as a client, and it's authorized as a client. We handle IVR like clients, like it was an automated client. Right? It's the way that works better and simpler. And things start to get really complex. Inbound routing services is the last part of the system, where we have DIDs, hunt groups, time routing, and audio. So there's a problem of routing internal calls, so you need DIDs. All of the users will ask you, okay, off hours we need to route to security, or we need to send a different message. So we had to implement all the scene. Hunt groups are parallel and sequential hunt groups, and time routing for routing to different places depending on how implemented OpenSIPs. Lessons learned. Combinations will kill your time and nerves while testing and fix. When you have a combination of IVR with call forwarding and a redirect programmed on the phone, it's a mess. Really. Yeah. Prepare to expend a lot of time testing. I like to say to my soft switch customers, the guys that terminate calls, the wholesale providers, year and a half. This hosted PBX is really complicated. And expect to increase your support in 5 times using hosted PBX instead of just making calls. Because if you're a wholesale provider, you do only 2 things. You send calls and you receive calls, and nothing else. Bills. And bills. And you send bills. 3 things, right? When you got on this thing, you start to have problems. Okay, transfers, captures, queues, IVRs. So the range of things that you can have on a trouble ticket spans from 3 or 4 operations to 20 or 25 different operations. And plus all the combinations. Right? Okay, remember, all the CDRs need to be correct when you transfer. All the CDRs need to be correct when you capture a call. It's funny because when you capture a call, it generates a new invite. Right? So you're receiving a call and you generate a new invite to replace that call. So you have for an internal call, you have an external invite to the gateway. So you need to generate the CDRs properly. So the combination of all these features generates a lot of work. And anyone that wants to provide a PBX hosted service, one of the advice that I can give you is put more people on tech school. For sure. Recorder, we did something really interesting. We use RTP proxy as a tool for recording. So we are recording on the RTP proxy, and it's great to do this. And another interesting thing that we can use recording automatic load balancing for recordings. So if we need 4 recorders, 200 calls per second, 200 calls recording on each server, you can balance, you can stack pile of RTP proxies. Right? The only problem was to read the recording. It's a great recorder, but it's a very bad player. And there's no way to play the RTP proxy. Have you tried to play the backup? Yes, you can import on Wireshark and do this, but you cannot send this to your users. RTP break was our first try. Don't even try it. It's a mess. It generates a click in the middle of the call, and fix it or don't waste your time. And use MP3 to save space. What we have used here, we have created a tool to decode the recordings. It's a tool that decodes SRTP, decodes G722, G729, and everything, and then we convert to MP3 at the end, and put just a small link on the CDR for the recording. It's easily integrated with the phone for on-demand recording. We have integrated this on the last week. The phone has a button, say, record. When you press the button to record, it sends an info package to the proxy. I grab this info package and we'll start recording on RTP. So we can implement on-demand recording on the RTP proxy. So very interesting.
So you use RTP proxy. So RTP proxy is in the call for every call, or is it when you do record, then you engage RTP proxy?
It really depends. If you go on the client and press recording, to set on the client to record, it records everything from this customer.
So
But
you
if
send
you
re-invites to engage RTP proxy?
no, you can send and start recording in the middle of the document.
But then RTP proxy should be.
If you are re-invited, you usually re-enable the RTP proxy. When you send a re-invite, I call again the RTP proxy offer and answer, and then I start recording. I think so. I don't remember exactly, but it works. So now for re-invites, you reactivate. You will look up again on the final result is this. Oops. This will show just. I won't spend a lot of time. Just show the. There's. This is a general machine. This is the final system. I don't want to make calls here. I just wanted to show the.
So now we know the IP, so we can attack it, right?
It's a demo machine. It's a string is slow. Well, it never works when I.
That's why Murphy is so well known, you know? Popular.
Well, I tried to warn you about those live demos.
Yeah. I tried 10 minutes ago just to check the break.
Oh, that's what broke it.
Okay, never mind.
I will edit this part of the record.
Huh?
I will edit this part of the
As a
record.
record. Okay.
Take off.
I just want to show you the interface, but it's more or less there. I know. Okay, it's showing okay. In my computer, it's showing a little differently. We have two panels here. So conclusions. We are still learning and fixing things on the hosted PBX because it's really something hard to do. The most amazing thing about the hosted PBX using OpenSIPs is to have a single product for everything. Use exactly the same script, the same server, the same interface for wholesale, for residential and hosted PBX. We go from, even in a hosted PBX system, we can put a wholesale provider and terminate thousands of calls. So usually have customers with 1,500 or 2,000 calls, simultaneous calls, 30 to 40 million minutes a month running in the exact same platform that we run.
How much servers? How much servers? What?
How much? No, it's not one server. It's never one server, right?
Yeah, no, you can do the failover, bell balance, and everything, but
usually two database servers,
Yeah.
two proxy servers, and a bunch of for media servers.
Making the load
usually-
balance,
usually
using
just
as load.
one. And RTP proxy depends on the traffic, the net traffic.
yeah, but
You need to dimension, but it's never one server.
with two groups of server, it's a lot of calls.
The registrations is just one server, and for the calls, there are customers running 1,500 simultaneous calls in a single server with everything.
This is very cool.
Interface and everything. But the nice thing is, I don't have to create more than one product. I use a single product for everything. All features are implemented in a standard way. This gives me less reward and better interoperability. So as I'm implementing exactly in the SIP standard, usually when I insert another phone, it works by default. I don't need to make a lot of changes from one thing to the other. Next in pipeline, we are implementing our hot desking, call compression, video conference, WebRTC, and distributed linking. So there are a lot of things to do. And it's funny, most of these things are not actually implemented in those cassettes. They're implemented on the phone. The phone has call compression, it has hot desking, it has a lot of features that we are simply exploring more the phone features. And another thing that I like a lot about this is, what's the manual that I give to the user? The manual of the phone, because it's actually the only thing that the user uses. Right? I don't need to give them web interface. But the final product is a marriage between the phone, the gateway, and the proxy. So it's really something tight. Okay, the phone is this one, the gateway is this one. Don't try anything new, or you'll have to rework a lot.
Well, actually, it's not a marriage, it's a kind of a menage a trois.
Okay. Next, we have the OpenSIPs not control panel. Okay. The idea now is to discuss
Some will take like 5 minutes break.
5 minutes break?
Like
Maybe
3
we'll run.
presentations, like
I just-
5 minutes.
I have one question.
Okay, go ahead.
As much as I appreciate all your aspirations in trying to do something like this, I go back to the words of a wise man during the first OpenSIPs training. It's not a PBX, it's a SIP proxy.
True. True. Let me go back to the first slide.
I'll say.
You're a masochist, apparently.
Yeah. No, the advantage, at least for us, are the possibility, our target market are ISPs and ITSPs. And this guy wants to provide services for a large number of users, and they want to have multi-domain system. I could have created this using FreeSwitch. And in many cases, I asked myself if it wouldn't be easier to do than do with OpenSIPs. But we took this decision a few years ago, and I don't regret it. I had a lot of time trying to do this thing, mainly because these are very poorly documented. You have just an RFC and have to go there and find your way to create the things. So you have to try and make some mistakes and try again, so it takes time. But at the end of the day, it pays off because I don't need to support more than one platform.
Exactly. No, definitely, there's
I
a treasure at the end of the rainbow. There's no doubt about it.
It's just in the defines, I have something like distro equals SCM, like wholesale, distro equals residential, and distro equals host PBX, and it just generates the script in the way I put it. It's a single, so it pays off. And for the customers too, because they need to support a single platform to offer lots of services.
Right.
Okay. Panel or 5 minutes? What do you prefer?
What was the other option?
What are the options?
You said 4 or 5 minutes.
Meat or chicken? No. Oh, sorry.
It tastes like chicken doesn't mean that it's actually chicken.
No, to have a 5-minute break or to
You have
go
still
straight
a
to
lot
the
of slides
panel.
left?
Huh?
You have a lot of slides left?
No, it's just this one, but I have just the top. It's a single step.
I can split that all of them.
I prefer to concentrate in one at a time. I don't know.
I just wanted to remind everybody there's popcorn up here.
Okay.
5 minutes.
5 minute break.
Okay.
Let's wait.
And I do not want to carry it to my room.